Get any last little minute jitters out?
Yeah. Shake it out. Shake them out. This is my first time hosting. So Riley, I was on an episode with you and your first time hosting. So
Yeah.
yeah. So this is exciting stuff. And we have a great episode in store. This is episode 17, an introduction to gender creative parenting. I'm your host, Jess. My pronouns are they, them, and I am stoked to introduce today's special guest to you all. But before I do that, let me pass the mic to Riley to say hello.
How's it going, everybody?
Iris. And I asked Iris to be a guest on today's episode because we are both queer and non-binary parents who do gender creative parenting. And I want to give us the chance to talk about it here and kind of just get into it a little bit tonight. But before we jump in, Iris, could you start by introducing yourself, just your name, your pronouns, and anything else that you're willing to share off the bat?
Yeah, of course. So thanks again for having me here today. I'm really stoked to be a part of this. Like you already mentioned, my name is Iris. I use all pronouns. Recently, I'm just leaning a little bit more toward people just calling me by my name. I live in the DMV area, which probably doesn't make sense to people who don't live in DC, Maryland, Virginia. So I live here with my partner, Tori, they, them pronouns, and our child, Troyer, they, them pronouns as well. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Great. We're so happy to have you. And what I thought we could start with tonight, before we really jump into talking about what gender creative parenting looks like for each of us, and sure we have some similarities and I'm sure we also have some differences because it's different for everyone. Mm-hmm. I wanted to start by just asking you, Iris, where did you hear about gender creative parenting? And what had you decide, I guess you and Tori decide that it was right for your family and for your kid?
Yeah, a great question, because it was actually pretty recent too. So in 2020, like everyone else was, I was going through my little journey of exploring my gender and who I was and where I landed. And I was at the time living in not quite the deep South, but almost there. And so this is so crazy that I happened to go into a bookstore and find Kyle Meyer's book, Raising Them. And I was like, okay, this book looks really cool and really random to find here. So I picked it up, I took it home, I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. I think I read it, I probably stayed up until like 2 or 3 a.m. that night and finished it. And the next day I looked at Tori and I said, you have to read this. Like, I feel like I need to read it again. I need to know more. And I spent the next probably several days to a week exploring everything out there. Like, all I knew was what Kyle had. So on their website, all of the resources, I was like searching hashtag gender creative parenting on every social media. And Tori kept saying, I can't read that because I know I'm going to want to do it. And it seems really hard. So it took a little bit to convince them to get there. But just like with me, as soon as they picked it up, couldn't put it down. And when they finished it, just looked at me and said, okay, you were right. This is what we need to do. And we had just started family planning at that point, which for us just looked like figuring out how we were going to have a baby, where we wanted to have a baby. We had met with an attorney and all that. And we knew we couldn't live where we were living if we wanted to be queer parents and also gender creative parents. So we packed up and moved back to the hometown I grew up in and had the baby and went from there. So that's my long-winded answer to your short question, but yeah.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. And how old is Troyer now?
Just turned 1. Okay. Yeah, like a month. Okay, 13 months. If I'm going to be one of those parents, that's like 52 months now. But yeah, no, 13 months.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, it's months for a while. So yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's great. That's so cool that you just like happened to see Kyle Myers's book in
Oh
a
my gosh,
bookstore. Like
yes.
that's such an interesting way of finding this. I actually just recently read that book, and in fact, that book is on our like it's a suggested book for our book club here.
Oh, good.
So yeah, so we maybe in the future, and teasing this a little bit, we might even dive into that specific book a little bit more. I read it within the last year as well, actually.
So it's still fresh for you.
It's still fresh for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had read a lot of stuff on Kyle's site before I read the book. Yeah. So my story, my intro to gender creative parenting, we knew that we didn't want to follow the typical binary gendered parenting like before we had a kid. But I definitely did not have the term of gender creative parenting. We decided we decided during the pregnancy that we were not going to find out the assumed sex of our child. So we kind of bought ourselves, a bit of time anyway, and that helped us not receive gendered gifts before the birth and all of that because no one knew. And but when our kid was born, we did announce his assigned sex, and so it was interesting because even though we had actually like talked to our friends and family, even though we didn't have the term gender creative parenting, we had let them know like we don't want a lot of super gendered stuff, like buy whatever color, buy whatever thing, but it was pretty evident, like really quickly, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed with the amount of gendered stuff that we got. I mean, just like the hyper gendered stuff that we got. And I felt like even more than like the stuff, it was also kind of like this, it's like social cues, or,
Yes.
kind of the different pressure in all different ways, whether it was overt or subtle, that was this very kind of, you are going to lead your kid down this path, right? And I really had an issue with that kind of right away. So our kid was only a few months old when my wife and I started talking about it in detail. And we started talking about it with a couple of close friends. And for me, what it really kept revolving around was I kept coming to this question of like, why should I really assume that my child is cis? Like really, honestly, why should I do that? Why do people do that? And what I really felt was at the bottom of it was ultimately like transphobia. And beyond just transphobia, like the push of cisgender as normal. And so I like at some point was Googling, and came across gender creative parenting. And it was really, I was like, wow, this is a thing. Like, I'm not the first person who's, like thought of this. And of course, like some of the things that we do that I'm sure, we'll get into in just a little bit, like some of them, a lot of parents do, that just don't really want to play that hyper gendered game or whatnot with the kids. But to me, it was also like, just with my own gender identity, like I really felt that I wanted to give my kid a clean slate. I wanted my kid to be a kid before being a gender. I really wanted to just give him the chance to show me who he was and let me support him without me coming at him with all these notions of, what he should wear and how he should be spoken to and all this other stuff. And to me, it was, that was just super important. So I found Kyle Myers' site and book and found some other, people online doing similar things and was able to have some really supportive friends, mostly to help us, kind of guide that way. So, so that's my story with it. And I'm curious, Riley, have you ever heard of gender creative parenting before? Or?
So the term specifically prior to meeting you, Jess, actually, no, I had not heard of it. But honestly, like listening to you guys talk about like your experiences, trying to navigate raising through gender creative parenting, I kind of like am looking back on my own childhood, and weirdly enough, despite growing up in a non-religious conservative household, I actually think my parents indirectly were doing some of that. Not, and it's like kind of weird to think back on it because it's like, well, you know, like early on, I was in like a soccer league and I was all separated by gender, but then they were like, oh, okay, so let's find something else, and they like put me in a bowling league, and so this was very much, hey, you're bowling with everybody. There is no boys, girls. It's everybody just bowling against
Mhm.
each other. And then like when I got into high school and I was starting to explore my sexuality and I was presenting very butch, for lack of better words. Um, they were very supportive and just were like, okay, like here we go, like we're just rolling with this. So like, you know, just kind of thinking back on just like some of those key highlight points like that, even, you know, just like weirdly enough, even though, like I said, it was a pretty conservative household, they were pretty doing good with the gender creative parenting in a way.
Yeah, it's a trip. I mean, I'm not like, that's not too surprising because I mean, I grew up in a really conservative household, but there were like, I also got some aspects of actually gender creative parenting. I mean, my mom was super into like, you know, you can do whatever, you know, like don't let a boy or a man tell you you can't, you know, do something. I mean, that was all very strong. On the flip side, for me, there was still a lot of anti-trans stuff too, a lot. And it was like, and again, it was like overt and subtle. And so it was like kind of this dichotomy, it was kind of like both, you know. It was a little bit more like almost radical feminist side, although I wouldn't quite put it in that category, but like kind of a little bit more towards that. But no, that's, I mean, it's not surprising because again, like, you know, a lot of these aspects of gender creative parenting, a lot of parents do. And I think part of it is kind of normalizing that a little bit,
Mhm.
is kind of a powerful thing. So, well, let's get into the details. I have a little list that we're going to go through of some aspects of gender creative parenting that I have noticed are kind of through lines through people that I know personally or people that I've seen online, like Iris and Tori, and even, you know, from Kyle Myers's book. But so we're just going to kind of take a few minutes on each of these topics, and I'm just curious, Iris, on, you know, your perspective, and
Mhm.
I'll kind of give mine, and Riley, you can chime in too, and we'll just kind of click through it here. So the first one is clothing. And I would say, you know, it's like all the children must wear gray, right? Or only black. No, that's for formal occasions. No. So really, I think one of the biggest things with gender creative parenting that's a big through line is that like color, like clothing is clothing. Like a shirt is a shirt, a dress is a
Mhm.
dress, and, you know, basically like let your kid wear what they want to wear, and kind of just for me, the only thing that I have tried to do up to this point, because my kid hasn't really been super interested in clothes, like not like super into
Mm.
clothes yet, is that I've chosen to not have him wear very gendered clothing in either direction. Like, but it's still like a lot of colors, a lot of designs, like whatever he wants. Like, yes, we have a few dresses. He doesn't really seem to be very interested in them, but like we have them, you know, so like that's cool. But Iris, what's your take on clothing?
Yeah, no. So I think especially when kids are so young in that first year, you have so much that you need and so much that you need to pay for that when it came to clothes, I mean, gender creative parenting aside, there is no way I would have been able to like afford a perfectly curated wardrobe for my 0 to 12-month-year old, because that makes sense. But you know what I mean.
All
So
good.
we from the start were very much like, even while I was pregnant, if people like posted on a group like, I have a box of clothes I'm giving away, we were like, oh, that's ours, we'll take it. And in our like circle of family and friends, we've all just kind of like recycled our children's clothing around each other. And it's interesting because in that group, there are people who have approached their parenting very gendered. And there are people who kind of ride the middle. And then there was me. So it's been interesting approaching that because then, of course, everyone says, like, let your kids pick out their clothes. And it's not really something you can do until maybe, they're 6 months and can be like, grab it. But, they're not really intentionally choosing. It's just something pretty in front of them. So it is interesting because dresses were hard for us. And I didn't think they were going to be until we realized it had been months and we had never put a dress on them. And we kind of broke that down a little bit between each other and had to talk about why that was tough for us and why we were avoiding it. And thinking back on like childhood photos of both Tori and I, when we are kind of uncomfortable looking back at ones where we're in dresses or just clothing in general that didn't fit who we were, but were kind of forced into. So I started to think through, that was hard for me. But at the same time, if I'm letting that in the way of my parenting, I'm not even giving them a chance to maybe have a photo of them in a dress when they were a baby to look back on and say, I love that. You know what I mean? So that was probably our toughest hurdle as far as clothing goes. I think that sometimes it's hard when I don't know if maybe you can relate with this, Jess, but do you ever feel like sometimes the crowd you're going to be around? So internally, you're kind of like, if I just dress them this way a little bit, like maybe the pronouns that person is going to assign to our child is going to be different. But that was always, something in the early, like maybe the first 3-ish months that we found ourselves doing a lot too, which was weird because we went into it thinking, clothing is clothing and this is our baby and whatever. And I should also add, I should have added this earlier, but we have been very intentional with strictly using they, them pronouns at this point. We did not share the biological sex, if you want to call it that. I know there's a lot of discourse in this community as well, which is maybe a topic for another time about what terms to use there, but we didn't share the biological sex of our child with anyone off the bat. And still to this point, it's caretakers and doctors. So it's been interesting as well, just to see, especially regarding the clothing they're wearing, what people let slip, you could say, or what they just decide for that day per the outfit they're wearing, which is so weird. Yeah, I don't know if you can relate with that at all, Jess, but that was a weird one for us, just kind of navigating how our own feelings came into play and how we were dressing them. And baby clothes are so cute. Like you just want to put everything on them. So we definitely have fun with it. But yeah, that's kind of where we were at with that. And now definitely, as they're getting older, we can see a little bit of their flavor. Very active kids. So something like a dress gets in the way a lot of time, and they get frustrated if their foot gets caught in the skirt. And so we lean toward like a tight bike short, because at the same time, the more balloony shorts also get in the way, or a t-shirt falls over their head, like, and things like that. So a lot of the times now we just dress for comfort. And where are we going to go? Are we going to open gym? Are you going to be crawling around? Are you going to be standing and walking and running? And that's kind of how we approach it now. Whereas I think when they were younger, we were very much like, they must have every color of the rainbow and every style, and we have to put them in all of this stuff. And now we've just started to let them kind of lead the way with that. So yeah.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that for sure. I mean, hand-me-downs, absolutely. Those are essential as a parent, because yeah, it's like you need so many clothes, especially in that first year. And then and then you just have to wash them so much. I mean, they get so dirty,
Yes,
you know, like it's like,
yes.
so yeah, hand-me-downs are essential. And I totally get that. I think that's also like a first parent thing of kind of just, and you know, this is like I only have one kid too. So it's like that, that kind of like, we're going to do it this way, you know, and then you get to the reality of it. And it's like, actually, whatever is clean today is great,
Yes.
you know? So yeah, I can absolutely relate to that. And definitely notice too, yeah, I mean, with different outfits and how our kid was, you know, is assumed to be a certain gender, you know, kind of just based on that. I mean, that's a lot of social cues is clothing, and a lot of kids' clothes are actually like really gendered. So especially even like, it's kind of amazing with the baby clothes, and you're like, it's a baby, you know?
Oh my gosh, drives me crazy. Like, we love to go to like any kinds of kids consignment events, things like that. And we're always like pouring through the aisles, and there's too many onesies and little shirts and things like that that are like, watch out for my daddy's gun. I'm like, oh, this is for a 3-month-old. I think that's a little too much for me there.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's wild. It's wild. But you know, big industry, because you need a lot of clothes. So so yeah, absolutely. Riley, do you have any thoughts on kids' clothes?
I mean, honestly, like not like at the very young age, but like when I'm thinking back, like especially on like again, you know, on my youth, my parents actually did kind of go out of their way to find pretty neutral clothing for all of us kids, especially because I know um while it was easier for like me and my younger sister, you know, to hand me downs in that perspective, I still actually did get hand me downs from my older brother. So it was kind of this interesting like going through and figuring out, okay, you know, can Riley wear this, or is this not going to be one of those things that is like really appropriate? But then like at the same time, they were like, you know what? If he wants to wear this Lord of the Rings shirt, he's going to wear the Lord of the Rings shirt. So, you
I,
know, like there was this things like that where it was like, okay, cool, you know, it wasn't even like an intentional like, hey, I love Lord of the Rings. It was just like, hey, you know, like again, if it was clean,
I
especially
think
you know, you
another,
think with multiple kids.
oh my gosh. Yeah, I have 3 siblings, and yeah, there was 4 of us, and I remember my parents were very strict with boys and girls stuff. So my childhood was a little different than what the two of you have shared, but I think that comes, you know, with religion. And the oldest of us is my brother, and he was the only one who like always got new clothes because the 3 of us, you know, sisters, could just kind of share and pass things around that way. And I remember always being really jealous of that. But another thing I wanted to call out is, it's been interesting too, is we have passed clothes on. If we like post a bin of, you know, we're like, oh, 3 to 6 month clothing, just come pick up at this location, you know, and the first thing people comment is it boys or girls? And I'm like, you're asking the wrong person,
Right.
because I got nothing for you. Like, if you're asking me if they're blue or if they're pink, they're yellow and green and blue and pink and polka dots and all these things. And if you're asking me if they say daddy's little girl, you're not going to find that in there. But especially at that age, they're onesies and shorts and shirts, and there's nothing different about them at that point. So that's just another interesting thing, is always like, is it boys or girls stuff? And I'm like, it's clothes, free,
Yeah.
just to take it.
Yeah. And that just
It's a
ends up
Lord of the
being,
Rings t-shirt, take it,
right.
wear it.
Yeah, totally. But I think that just ends up being like kind of a pattern to like to parenting in general, and even that young parenting is like all of that, like just kind of all of that pressure from everywhere in society to kind of constantly, you know, define your kid in that way.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, constantly gender them, which which again, you know, for a lot of people is like, that's what they want. And like, they're cool with that. And that's, you know, but I think especially for people who have spent time questioning it, it's like, well, again, like, why do we always have to do, you know, why do we always have to be looking at it from this perspective? Which Kyle Myers mentioned a lot in their book. So so the next topic is toys also have no gender. I think my kid is a little bit older. He is getting close to 4, like 3.5, 4, somewhere in there. But it's definitely, you know, baby toys. Sometimes you get that for sure. But I mean, babies don't even hardly have toys for the first 6 months, you know, except for like the keys and stuff like that.
Right.
The ball, you know, but especially as kids start to get a little bit older, and especially the way that the stores are separated, the different aisles, you know, like the pink aisle and the blue aisle and all of those different things. Our perspective is toys do not have gender. And again, we've at this point kind of taken the same approach of we're following our kid's lead on what he's interested in, but a lot of the toys that we have are, you know, we do have like both some things that would be considered girl toys and boy toys, but I don't like to have anything that, you know, like says that or you know, just really screams that so much in whatever way. Like my kid has a couple of dolls, but they're not like, I mean, they're not like Barbie dolls, but they're not like that, like super feminine dolls, you know, they're just like dolls. They're like the more fabric-y kind of dolls. And he's actually, there are a couple different ones that have like, excuse me, different colored skin tones, but it's just not in that hyper feminine way. What about you, Tori? Have you gotten into that at all yet? Or
I think they're still so young that we haven't really approached that yet. Again, I don't think we bought one toy like the first year of their life, I would say, because we just got a lot of hand-me-downs. And I can't really call out like a baby toy that was super gendered for the early, like, first 6 months or so. And then probably around, I want to say it was like 10, 11 months old. We were just walking through Target and we were like, you know what, let's just take a stroll through the toy aisle. Let's see if they gravitate toward anything. And we came up to like 3 Sesame Street stuffies, dolls, whatever you want to call it. And it was like Elmo and Cookie Monster and Abby. And I don't know if your kid watches Sesame Street or if you do screen time or anything like that, but we watch a lot of Sesame Street in our house. And Abby is the little fairy that always like waves the wand and says like zippity something or whatever with the wand. And like Troyer totally gravitated to picking out the Abby. And I think, you know, just from that connection, like, oh, the wand is fun. Like they always laugh when she does the little zippity thing. And it was so cool for that, to watch that kind of unfold, to see like, oh, I recognize what that is. And that's the one I want. And, you know, it's something that really baffles me when parents who parent in a very gendered way kind of miss out on that sometimes if they're always choosing what they think is right for their child. And I 100% respect every parenting style and how people approach raising their children, because it's hard and we're all just doing the best we can. But I try to talk on that a lot when I talk about gender creative, gender open, everything parenting, is the fact that you get to watch your child think about things in a way that I don't think we would have seen had we not been parenting this way. So it's so silly that to have that moment with a toy, but it was really special for us to realize that they picked that out. They did that. That's the one they wanted. And, you know, it gets thrown on the floor of our car now, but, you know, there with the keys,
Yes.
but,
as all good toys are.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting as they get older. And I feel like probably where you're at, that like preschool-ish age is when I think things start to shift a lot for kids and things start to get that split. So I will be looking to you and how you all are going to handle that for sure. We'll keep talking.
Yeah, we'll keep talking. Yeah, we'll definitely keep talking for
Mhm.
sure, for sure. Riley, what about you? What do you think about, you got any 2 cents on gender toys, non-gender toys?
I mean, honestly, like I was a kind of a weird kid anyway, so like my choices in toys were always kind of I guess neutral anyway. I mean, like I was always like trying to keep up with my brother, but also like the other kids in the court, and just I was just involved in every aspect with everybody, and I was just trying to like figure out what the heck was even going on, I guess, with life. So for me, like, it was just kind of like this aspect of um just wanting to be your older siblings in a way sometimes, and things like that, and just wanting to be the other kids in the court, and just so like for me, I was just always trying to play like kickball or baseball, and accidentally breaking a car window in the process. um and just hide and seek, and just being outside with all the other kids, and so it never really felt gendered in any sort of way when we were doing those sorts of things anyway. But even even when it came down to it, like I still like played house and things like that with like
Mhm.
the other girls and whatnot in the court, when it wasn't just all the kids all the time and all that. But like my parents weren't actively encouraging one way or another though with a lot of the toys. Like they obviously very much encouraged like the music, and my aspects of like, hey, I wanted a drum set, I wanted a keyboard, I wanted my flute, I wanted to play all the instruments. So like they did encourage that, and there is no gender to music, so like that was always a very
Mhm.
nice thing for them to encourage. Especially because I did have such a strong tie to it, especially throughout middle school and high school, where I was like, in high school, I went to a visual and performing arts academy for playing music. So like, it
Oh,
was one of
wow.
those things where it was like really nice to be encouraged to do those things that didn't have any sort of gender tied to it even.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I think kind of overall that's one piece that I've found is like, if you're not focusing on gendering your kid in a lot of ways, and again, a lot of parents aren't necessarily, it's not like they wake up every day and they're like, I got to really reinforce this gender binary, but they do in a lot of ways, but it's not like a conscious thought for most people. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been really freeing for me, and I will speak for my wife, she's not here, but like it has been really freeing for us to be able to just follow our kids' interests more, and
Mhm.
and not have to even have the thought of like, well, is this a boy thing or is this a girl thing, and is this okay, or
Mhm.
and again, that's going to shift as time goes on, and socialization starts to change, and our kid goes to school and all of that. um but yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's like, yeah, music, not gendered, just music, just like a lot of like outside stuff, is like, if it's, that's like not gendered, I mean, sports, I would say in general, especially like little kids sports, not gendered. Unfortunately, they do start to gender kids sports like really early as far as separating
Mhm.
them a lot of times. And I think that that's really unnecessary. Of course, sports is a whole nother conversation of sports and gender, right?
Ooh.
But like, I don't see why that is needed especially, I don't see why that's needed in a lot of cases, but or in pretty much all cases, but that's not this discussion. But definitely not for like little kids. So our next aspect that we're going to cover here is books. One thing that we have really focused on with our gender creative parenting is just reading diverse books. Some of that means like reading books that are actually about gender diversity, or reading books that are that talk a little bit about gender identity. on whatever is an age appropriate level, whether it's a story or more of kind of a conversation around that. And in fact, I actually have a recommendation. I meant to bring it down, but I didn't. So I'll just read out the title to it. Our favorite one that we have gone through with our kid a lot and will definitely continue to, is called Being You, A First Conversation About Gender. And it's, Iris, you're familiar, huh?
No, I love that whole series. Yeah.
I love that. I was just going to say, I love the whole series too. They have one about skin color, which is really great as well. That we use a lot. And they actually, they came out with some more. I need to check because we own a couple of them, but I noticed at the library that there are a couple more in that same series. And it's, let's see, there are a few different authors. It's Megan Madison, Jessica Raleigh, and Anne/Andy Pashier. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's a really great book. It's been a great way to just have, even if we're just looking at a couple pages of it at a time, have kind of short conversations with our kid about gender in an age appropriate way. But we also use, different, have found different fiction books as well that are just a little more gender diverse. And another thing that we do a lot that I have found really fun is that we sometimes just switch up pronouns in books. And so I do this especially if it's a book that's really heavy in one pronoun direction. Like, okay, I know I just was like praising this other book, but I will call this one other book out. There's this book called Good Night Construction Site. And it's like 10 or 12 different construction vehicles, right? And like all of them are he. And it's just like, why? Like, why do all of the different, like you have all these different examples of, the excavator, the bulldozer, the crane, like, why do they all need to be he? Like at least throw in a she. Like, I know that a lot of authors, may not be to the point yet that they're comfortable with they, although like I'm definitely looking out for that more, but we switch it ourselves, especially if it's a book like that where it's not a human character, it's a bulldozer, it can be a she, it can be a they, it can be a he, it can be whatever. We don't typically switch gender for books that are already gendered characters, like if we're reading Winnie the Pooh, Christopher Robin is a he. That's just like how we approach it.
Yeah,
but we do find, the ones that where there's, if it's anthropomorphized already, then like you can kind of do what you want. And we've just done that just so that our kid is hearing different pronouns and we're not presenting these books that are really pointing in one direction. So you have any thoughts on that, Iris?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on so much of that. And it's so a couple of months ago, we had the opportunity to go to a weekend retreat with other gender creative families, gender diverse families in general, parents of older trans children and things like that. And one of the speakers there was Bobby McCullough. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they were another one of the folks who really spearheaded this movement, you could say. And they mentioned that in their workshop. And, they were like, we use neopronouns and all this stuff. And we found ourselves doing it all the time for every character in every book. And then we realized we were never really using she and he and kind of lost ourselves there. And so it's funny to kind of hear someone speak about swinging a little too far in one direction. But I think another thing too is bugs, the characters that are bugs. We are always changing those up because something too, Tori laughs at me for this and would tell me that I'm overthinking it, but there is a book by Eric Carle and it's The Grouchy Ladybug. And the ladybug, and the ladybug's a he. No, is it? Yeah, the ladybug's a he. And I had this whole like crisis over, is the ladybug a boy because he's grouchy and men are grr and tough because the ladybug fights everyone in the book,
Right.
Everyone who's not a parent listening to this who has no clue what that book is like, what are you all on? But we're like, is the ladybug a dude because he's tough and fighting and grumpy, Or was Eric Carle like, hey, this ladybug, that ladybug can be a he, and really changed it up on us, you know? So those are one of the instances where I'm like, I'm overthinking this. I just need to read the book. But yeah, and we try a lot to get books for all families, all family types, and we're very lucky because our favorite bookstore has an entire section that it keeps growing every time I go, that is just for queer families. And we got like the pronoun book from there, and these are board books, like these are for little kids. And I love that that is starting to be published more, and that we live in an area where we can find that really easily and have access to it. And I love those My First Conversations books, because even the kids and the families and the grown-ups in those books are they're so intentional with the way that they look as well. So you know, you can see some of them have visible disabilities, some of them have, you know, patches on their skin, or, you know, things like that. So some of those authors follow us on Instagram. I love them so much. And especially My First Conversation About Gender, I give that book to adults because I think everybody should be reading it. So yeah.
It's a really great book. Have you read Bodies Are Cool?
No.
Okay.
Is that a board
Bodies Are
book
Cool
or
by
paper book?
Tyler Feder or Feder. I'm
Okay.
not 100% sure how their last name is pronounced, but it's Feder. That book is also really great. All about bodies, doesn't really touch the topic of gender through the words of the book. But definitely the illustrations are wonderful in that book, and it shows it shows a lot of different bodies. So it does end up showing a lot of gender variation, a lot of skin tone variation, a lot of ability variation in the book, in the illustrations. And it's a really great and also
that.
kind of snapshots of families and different things. So you would probably like that book too. And yeah, sounds like that bookstore is so cool. They
I love it.
probably have it. Wouldn't be surprised.
I'll look for it next time.
Yeah, totally. Let's see, I had next on the list teaching about gender identity and diversity, but I think we kind of just covered that a little bit. You know, beyond that, at this point, we're really using those books more, and then also just examples of people in our kids' life to teach about gender diversity. I mean, the main one is definitely like me. My wife is cis, so like I am obviously big representation point of someone who is not cis, but we also have other friends who are non-binary and trans and fluid and all of that. And so yeah, that's obviously just important too, with representation and awareness. Beyond that, you know, just because of the age of our kid, we haven't really gone into much like more conversation than that. That'll all come in due time when he's ready to talk about that more. But and I'm curious if you guys have, if you've got that book, other than that, I know your kid is 13 months, but do you have any other thoughts on like teaching gender identity and diversity?
I think it really is all about piecing together your community well, and who the people around your child are. And I think of like my nephew, this one story I love to tell. I think it's such a good example, but probably just a couple months after Troyer was born. So I carried them, and we had my nephew in the car. We were going somewhere, and out of nowhere, he says to Tori, and he calls them Toto. And he goes, Toto, I thought that you were a dad. And Tori was like, okay, like let's talk about it. You're 4. Let's talk about this. And you know, it was so cool to hear what went through his mind with that. And why did he think Tori was a dad? Was it because I was pregnant and I'm the mom and Tori was not, and so Tori's the dad? Or, you know, so we kind of got to very lightly touch on how dads can also be pregnant, and some families don't get pregnant at all, and some, you know, and things like that. And it was so funny because, I mean, I just, you know, just looking out the window like, Toto, I really thought you were a dad. And it, you know, and then it ended up being such a sweet conversation. So, you know, I think those things will also come in time, but we like you also try to just expose them to different people and different experiences. Like they've been to a drag show already and drag story time and things like that. And yeah, I'm with you on all of that.
Nice. Yeah, we lucked out. We got, our kid was able to see drag last year Pride.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if it's going to be around in this state this year when our Pride is in the fall, and I don't know if I don't know if they're going to perform publicly right now in this area. Drag most of the time is all, I don't know if it's 18 or up or 21 and up, but it's definitely not, they don't, you know, just, I think some of the performers have just decided with the current climate that they're just,
you almost have
they're
to.
just not, they just don't want to even start to, you know, touch that topic with kids. And so they've just kind of stopped doing the all ages events for now, which is really unfortunate. But I was really glad that he got to see it last Pride, and that was really cool, and he loved it. So yeah. So I guess the other piece with all of this is, and we kind of touched on this earlier, I think all of us have kind of touched on this earlier, but just the awareness of gender coaching, that again is, you know, sometimes it's super duper overt, you know, with what a pretty little girl, or, you know, like, hey, tough guy, or, you know, whatever, or even, you know, comments on, it seems like it's a lot of times girls or kids perceived as girls are, you know, it's a lot about their appearance. It's a lot about how they look, you know, and with boys or kids who appear as boys, or somebody who genders a kid as a boy, it's more about, you know, what he's doing and things like that. And then also, and also again, obviously with clothing and toys and what's, you know, considered appropriate. But it's this journey of gender creative parenting for me has just been interesting. Just all the things that I notice that I may not have, you know, I don't just haven't thought about as much before. Even smaller things of, you know, even hearing other conversations that people have. And again, I'm very much agree with you, Iris, that like parenting is hard, and any of this is like in no way a critique of any way that anybody else wants to parent. Like, go for it. I do not judge. This is just how I'm doing it, you know. But yeah, it's just been really interesting to notice all of the different really strong and also really subtle ways that especially like really young kids are kind of pushed in these directions of the binary of, you know, of boy and girl. And what, you know, what we have done is just tried to, I mean, a lot of times if we're with a stranger or something, you know, we're at a park and a stranger makes a comment, like a lot of times I will just move on with my day.
Same.
It is not, it's like, I don't want to get into it with anybody. It doesn't, you know, we just move along. And sometimes my kid will say something about it and sometimes he won't. If he says something about it, we'll talk about it. If not, then we just let it go. But it's definitely been an interesting thing to kind of notice that it is just like constantly happening.
I want to kind of bounce off of that too, because in your notes you talked that you sent me earlier, you talked a little bit about like behavior expectations, and I think that is such a huge part of why we are doing what we are doing. And I think back to my childhood, and I was listening to you two talk about like sports and music and things like that. So I was homeschooled, and in my homeschool co-op, the girls class, we stayed inside and like made butter in mason jars Like, I really, can I swear on this? I was about to
Yes.
swear.
Yes. We've
Okay.
got the, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Like, I shit you not, we sat there making bonnets. We fucking sewed bonnets, okay? And we were inside sewing away with our fragile little hands and making soap. I remember that too. We made soap one time, which was probably cool. You know, soap is cool. But the boys were outside and they were in woodworking class or getting to play um soccer or run around, and like they got PE and we shook a mason jar full of heavy cream. So like right there, that was so big for me when I knew that we wanted to have kids even prior to gender creative parenting and having words for it. I was like, that is a big no-no for us, is these behavior expectations, and people start that so young. Even with like boys, they take so much longer to learn how to walk, or girls potty train so fast. And I'm like, where are you getting that from? Is what I would like to know. Where's the data? I want to talk about this a little more because you know, a year ago you told me because my stomach was shaped a certain way that I was going to give birth to a female baby. And you know, now that they're older, you swear by the way that they learned how to crawl that they're a male baby, and then tomorrow you're going to tell me it's a female again, and then let can't you just let it be? Can't you just let my kid learn to walk at their own pace, learn to use the potty at their own pace, um, do these things on their own schedule? Besides, I don't know, other than telling them, like, I feel like sometimes parents almost give up on certain things too, like, oh, boys take so long to potty train, we're not even going to deal with that. Or, you know, the girls, they grow up to hate their moms, they just do. And oh, you just wait for that, you know, things like, why are we setting our kids up for that? Like, why are we having that perspective even from such a young age? Or you know, boys are so energetic. I'm like trying to pull all these little things, and
Right.
it's so bizarre to me, like where did we decide, where and when did we decide that things were going to be this way? And I know we could dive into the patriarchy and how these things truly came into play, but that is probably the biggest thing that blows me away, is how people approach behavioral expectations and milestone expectations in these children who are so young. They're so little, and we put that on them already. We put that burden on them at such a young age. And I really appreciate that gender open parenting deconstructs that, not only for them but for me as well, in how I parent. And you know, things that I would never have thought about until, like, maybe you can agree that, do you feel like when you committed to this that all of a sudden you noticed every gendered nuance?
Oh, absolutely.
Every
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know that I would have thought about those little things. Even me identifying with the trans non-binary umbrella, I still don't think I would have caught on to these things with kids. And you know, sports is a big thing. Why do we split them up in sports at 3 years old? They're running around a track. Why are
Right.
we
Right. Like
splitting them
nobody's
up for
hitting the
that?
ball anyway. Like it doesn't, you
Right,
know, like
exactly.
they're all going the wrong way. It's fine. You know, it
Yeah,
doesn't, we don't need to
yeah.
separate them. But no,
Mm-hmm.
that's really well said though, on like behavioral expectations. I find that is so true. And I think there's a lot to be said. I mean, you said this, but I'm just going to highlight like the difference in the approach for the parent to your relationship to your
Mm-hmm.
kid. You know, if you're able to just take that and put it aside and just focus on your kid as an individual instead of your preconceived notions of what they need to act like because of their gender,
Yep.
and what you think society is expecting because of their gender.
Mm-hmm.
It just really, really I don't want to say changes the relationship, it does, but it really like opens up the relationship, I feel like, and just allows it to be whatever it is organically outside of that, which is really, really a trip. Riley, do you have any any thoughts on that?
I mean, honestly, like I've had honestly, so like I had a thought a little bit ago while you guys were talking about the books and stuff. I just want to kind of circle back a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit to that for
totally.
a
Yeah,
Yeah,
second.
please
please.
do.
Yeah, no. So it's actually kind of just really fascinating how many books and things are out now because I actually, throughout middle school and high school, was a volunteer at my local library. And so I actively was every Sunday pulling the books that were put on hold for the like get to sent all over the city to like from our library. And I helped at other libraries too, doing the same thing. So like I actively was like in the shelves every Sunday. And so like these books didn't exist a decade ago, like
Hmm.
more than a decade ago. So it's just wild to me like how much has come in the last decade. Um
That is absolutely true.
Hmm.
And it's also wild with the kind of more recent backlash, like how many are banned, you know?
Yeah.
Like all
Hmm.
these new books, because I think part of it is, you know, and this is the pendulum swinging, is like a lot of books came out, and then that conservative backlash kind of went along with what was behind those books coming out, which is more acceptance of gender variance in society and kind of this different societal conversation, you know. And then it was like the fist came down to try to
Hmm.
clinch that up. So yeah, that's interesting too, because when you look at some of the banned lists, it's like, yeah, I mean, of course you look at a big list of banned books, there's like a lot of stuff that's a lot older, but especially like gender, gender variant books or gender diverse books, a lot of them are like really recent. So
Hmm.
that's really true. That's really true. Um, so another aspect of gender creative parenting that's super important for my family is body autonomy. And obviously, like, and again, this is something that is certainly not only with gender creative parenting. And I'll just like pause here and say, like, a gender creative parenting is not the only parenting style that I do. You know, I think
Yeah.
a lot of our parenting is kind of in the Montessori
Hmm.
method, although we're certainly not strict Montessori, but I mean, that whole idea is child-led. So a lot of people actually think of gender creative or gender open parenting as kind of following in that that kind of theory or that kind of theme. But I mean, we also do we do intuitive eating, and
Hmm.
we do I'm kind of losing some other ones right now. We're doing
Like
like early
respectful
reading prep.
parenting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
some people, thank you for saying that, because it's the bigger thing is it's different names, respectful parenting or gentle parenting. I don't like using
Yeah.
gentle parenting because people
I
think that
prefer
that means that
respectful.
you're a pushover and your kid's
Yeah. Yeah.
gonna be a jerk to everybody, and that's not my
Hmm.
experience of it at all. In fact, it's I usually say conscious parenting, but it's like it is
Mm.
that respectful parenting, and that is also where a lot of the bodily autonomy comes in as
Yeah.
well. But basically, the idea for that is that um, our kid knows the name of his anatomical body parts, you know, all of them, including his genitals, and we do not use nicknames for that. And then all around, we just have a lot of different kind of practices around consent. Sometimes that was like, I even really tried to do it as a kid. I mean, with a baby or picking up a baby so much, I don't feel like I did it every time, but I definitely did it as soon as he became a toddler, and that was, you know, he's moving around more and stuff, that if I needed to pick him up, I would actually say that, you know, I would say, hey,
Hmm.
I'm going to pick you up now. Part of that is like, you know, with that respectful parenting is like, if, you know, you're trying to leave the park and a kid doesn't want to leave the park, you know, you give them a chance to get up and leave the park on their own. And if they can't, then you say, okay, I see you're having a hard time moving. Now I'm going to pick you up and move you, you know, but basically
Hmm.
just communicating before that. And even when, you know, even if it's like getting dressed or in the bath or, you know, going potty or whatever, I actually like let him know, like, hey, we're going to put on your shirt now, you know, like, okay, we're, you know, like, I'm going to towel you off now, like things like that. And also giving him a chance to, um, like I can't say no, because it's like, you know, you got to take a bath, right? But like if he is basically telling me like, you know, he doesn't want to be picked up, if I can avoid it, I will avoid it, you know, like, I mean, if it's really time to leave the park and I've given him a chance to walk out on his own, then I'm probably going to chuck him over my shoulder and go. But, you know, I'm at least telling him like, I hear you, but like, we got to go now. But just really trying to build in more consent around body boundaries. And a big thing with that for us is we've been really big on not having to show displays of affection with people, and they, including us, you know, but not, you know, when we're saying hello and goodbye to people, even if, you know, if it's friends, even if it's family, even if it's me, even if I'm like, I'm going to go to work now, do you want a hug? If he says no, I'm like, okay, I'll wave, see you later, have a good day, you know. Or sometimes I don't even offer the hug, I'm just like, hey, do you want a fist bump, you know, do you want a high five or whatever? And that feels really awesome in that way, because I know that when my kid wants to connect with me, like wants a hug, like he really wants it, you know, because I've given him that space to say no, and I've given him that space to like ask for it himself. And so it feels really good to me that I'm like, you know, I know that that's not being pushed on him. Sometimes it can be a little tricky with you know, with certain people, or like certain family that might expect that or just be used to that from their own patterns, but that's something that you work through. So anyway, Iris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you know, I just want to really applaud you on that, because obviously you have an older kid than I do, and it just gets more challenging to stand in those philosophies as they get older. And I think it's a really beautiful thing what you are doing, what I am doing, what truly a lot of parents in our generation are now doing, is I'm coming at it of this perspective of they don't owe me anything. They don't owe me what people perceive as, you know, good behavior, quote unquote. They don't owe me certain gender. They don't owe me a hug. They don't owe me going to college. They don't owe me spending time with me, you know, and I'm kind of coming at it all from that perspective, which I think ties in so much to this conscious parenting. I love that. And even gender open parenting, in the way that we approach that is like, we are giving this to you, and take what you want from it. And this is how we want to approach it with you. And I really just really appreciate that when I can hear that from another parent of an older child, and know that you're fighting the good fight. And I think that our kids will have such a different experience than we did, and a lot of our generation did. So I'm on it with you, like in same approach to things. Everything is very much child led. And, you know, there are things that like Tori and I talk about how when they're older, maybe even now, like in this season of toddlerhood that we're getting into, is there are times when they'll be allowed to make a decision for themselves. There will be times when we all will need to discuss the decision. And there will be times when we, as your parents, just have to make that decision for you. And we'll talk about it, and we'll talk you through it and give you our reasoning. It's not going to be a because we said so situation.
Yep.
But I really think that gender creative parenting is a part of all of that, is a part of this respectful parenting movement in general. Because like I said, it's all child led in the way that we're approaching this. So wouldn't that also, you know, bring in this crazy idea of not assigning a gender to our child, and letting them show us the way with who they are and what they want to do, and all that. So yeah, 100% agree with you on all of that. And especially when it comes to talking about our bodies and our body parts, I think that is safety, first of all, being aware of the correct language for every body part. And I also think that gives them a little bit more control, autonomy over themselves to know this is my body. These are the parts that I get to share with other people if I want to high five them, or if I want to hug them. But I also don't have to do any of that either. And I can say no if someone is trying to, I don't know, take me to the potty and I would rather my mom take me to the potty, things like that. It's just all about giving our children the tools to figure that out and be able to make those decisions. And I think it's the same thing with gender, and the way that we're approaching this with them is we are just handing them the tools and they're going to put it together and figure it out. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Riley, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
It's just kind of funny, some of the things that Iris was saying that kind of just triggered a little bit of not bad triggered, but like obviously it triggered just some memories here. Like just my parents talking to me in recent months about how their expectations of us kids have changed since the passing of their parents, because they were
Mm-hmm.
full-time caregivers for both their mothers for a while actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so like just the expectation of like what's coming for us kids after what they've had to go through with all that, and just like what they're expecting um from even the grandchildren and the other children, and how they are, because my parents, not amongst all of the other chaos they had going on with my grandmothers, they also were caregivers to one of my cousins and my niece as well. So like they had a full house. um
Wow.
and so like even amongst dealing with the elderly grandmothers and having two children that are of elementary school age in the house all at the same time, and having to parent that while also dealing with the grandmothers and all of that. So like it's just really interesting just to see how they've been even almost getting like a second chance at parenting again, with my cousin and my niece, and just how they've been interacting with that and how they've been going about it, especially because my niece was born during my senior year of high school when I began my social transition. So like how my parents have been dealing with all of that regarding her, and then when my cousin came into the picture, for them having custody of him, and just how they've gone about trying to continue being, um, I guess, not as structured with the gender roles, I guess, as much. So even though like they've fallen a little bit into it because of going into public school and just how children are. So just the expectations that public school kids especially have when they're interacting with each other. But just like seeing how that they go through the world, and with all the aspects of, even with the sort of gender creative parenting that I got to sort of experience growing up, and seeing them get to go through in a different sort of aspect now, it's just kind of interesting to see how it all kind of plays out, you know?
Yeah, it definitely, that's interesting. And sounds like obviously your parents are taking on a lot of caregiving all around. But that's interesting, I think, for anybody to, I can't say this from personal experience, but it sounds interesting for anybody to like have gone through parenting with kids and then later in life, go through that again in a little bit of a different way, but also from a different perspective, because like parents are 100% like learning all the way.
Yes.
And so that's, and also like as culture has shifted and everything, and as their relationships have shifted, and like they have a trans son, and that's gotta have shifted some ideas of their own ideas of gender and like that. So yeah, that's interesting just to note that you see that shift.
And
too.
something that we see a lot, with like through our Instagram and having the opportunity to talk with other people and hear their experiences, and a lot of it is like a couple sentences in the comments, but we see so much people will comment and say like, I wish I knew what this was when I was raising my kids, but I think that I kind of did that. And I love to affirm that with people because it is so much more than pronouns, which a lot of people just are like, what is this they them thing? And I'm like, it's that, but it's also not. It's also so much more beyond that, and everything we've discussed tonight so far. And I always am trying to affirm that in people. Like, you are probably doing this, even if you don't realize it, or if you think that you were doing that in the stories that you're retelling about how you raised your kids, like, yes, you were doing it awesome, you know, and it doesn't have to be this like, you know, you get one chance and you do it or you don't. Like, I think that you know, my I use my sister as a great example of this, because she raised my nephew with gender pronouns and things like that, but he also is fully aware that he gets to pick out all his clothes at any given time. If he wanted to talk a little bit more about gender or pronouns, he knows he can. And he understands that, you know, he doesn't have to be rough and tumble. He's allowed to cry, you know, things like that. And she would never have labeled herself as a gender creative parent, but yet she has been one. And so I think that's really neat that you share that, Riley, and your parents having this like second go about it, and how, you know, their thoughts and perspectives have changed. So, but I hear that a lot with parents who have raised children who are now older. They get to kind of look back and say, I think I kind of did that. And am I allowed to pat myself on the back for that? And I'm like, yes, hell yes, you are. Please do.
Yeah,
You were
absolutely.
ahead of your
Well,
time.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, please, parents, pat yourself on the back for anything
Yes.
anything you feel good about, because it can be
Mhm.
tough. But yeah,
Mhm.
and that was even mentioned, even brought up a little bit in the last episode, about, you know, from some parents of trans kids,
Mhm.
and some of them, you know, even mentioned that they did this, some aspects of it, like, you know, color choosing and things like that, for sure. And I think that there is so much more to gender creative parenting than pronouns. And
Mhm.
I was talking to a friend of mine who just recently had a kid, and um, was talking to her about this, and kind of mentioning like, hey, like, because some things she was interested in, and the pronouns were kind of, she was like, that's, you know, that's a lot. And I was like, yeah, well, you know, you don't have to do it. Like, you know, like, just
Mhm.
do what feels right. You don't have to do any of this, but
Yeah.
like, hey, like, you know, take from this what fits for you. But
Mhm.
that is a really good segue into the next little aspect, which is pronouns. So my story of this is like, so when because we had not planned on, we didn't have the term for gender creative parenting before. And in certain ways, I kind of wish that we did, but we didn't. And so when our kid was born, we did, you know, we announced his assigned sex, and for several months, people were using those pronouns, and then we decided to do gender creative parenting, or really looked into it. And when we
Mhm.
took the time to look into it and had a big conversation about it, it was, for us, it was going to be a shift, because we were shifting to they them pronouns for
Mhm.
our kid, and that was really important to us. And it, you know, we thought about it and talked about it and read about it for a while before we decided to do it. But to me, it was really important for the way that we wanted to do it, for that kind of clean slate for our kid.
Mhm.
And so we did that, and I think our kid was, he must have been a little under one, and maybe like 9 months old or something like that, when we started using they them pronouns. And and uh and like, on occasion, we would, you know, kind of read a couple pages from that book, that, you know, the first conversation about gender, especially
Mhm.
as he started to get a little bit older. Not at 9 months so much, you know, but especially as he started to get a little bit older. And you know, we talked about it a little bit here, and we didn't talk about it all the time or bring it up every day or anything like that, but we did, you know, talk about it some, and talk about pronouns, and just let him know, like, we are, you know, we have we are using they, them pronouns for you until you tell us otherwise. And at 2.5, one day our kid was like, I'm a he. And we were like, oh, cool. Okay, right on. And then like, we were kind of
Isn't that
chilling.
incredible? I mean,
It's a
2.5,
trip.
like,
And my wife was
yeah.
like, so like, he said this, I think I should say he now, like we're going to make this shift again. And so, we kind of, at first, like a few days, we kind of like, we didn't really tell anybody else. Cause I was like, well, I don't know. Like he might change his mind like tomorrow. And I mean like, hey, he might change his mind like tomorrow, and that's fine. And that's like part of it too. And it was really interesting to me because again, it kind of, this whole process for me has been digging into a lot of my own internalized transphobia through kind of deciding to do gender creative parenting at all. And I mean, I had all these thoughts like, like, oh, he's too young and, he doesn't know what he's saying. And like, I don't know what he's thinking. But I don't think it's as much about gender identity at the moment as it is about the word, that like he identifies with that word. Particularly for my kid, I have been very careful to refer to him as a kid or a child. I don't refer to him as a boy or a girl. I don't refer to him as my son or my daughter. I just haven't done that yet. It's not that I'm not willing to do that. Like when he tells me which one of those feels right to him, that's cool. We'll go with that. But I just like, to me, I don't want to just be like, okay, he chose he, so we have a boy and we're going to go this way now. That's like the whole point about gender creative parenting is like, that's not what you do,
Right.
So,
it doesn't stop once they start to resonate with a specific pronoun. It doesn't, you don't just give up and you're like,
totally.
Wait, we did it.
Yeah. So like, like, even though he uses he pronouns now, every once in a while, I'm still like, hey, do you want to wear this dress today? Or whatever. Or like, do you want to play with this doll or, whatever, and just let him make the call. And just really work on for myself, providing him a lot of options and just supporting him in whatever direction he wants to go in. It has been interesting that I think generally people like the binary pronouns, like as they do for adults, they feel much more comfortable with the binary pronoun than with they. And so, has been interesting to see how those conversations, whether it's with strangers or even with people we know, even just saying, okay, like our kid is using these pronouns now. And like, and that shift or that, using those binary pronouns seem to definitely be easier. And it's just interesting because I just think that a lot of people are just so attached to pronouns. And I don't mean, I think it's great for people to be attached to their own pronouns. Like that's fine. But I think it generally like, the amount of attachment that people have to other people's pronouns is just wild, like it is just freaking wild to me. So yeah, I mean, even with me, like I use they, them pronouns and I'm one of them, so it's like, and I've seen that online. Oh, they're one of them. I'm like, okay. But yeah, that's a trip. And it's just interesting to me again, how that like, we still do all that gender creative parenting, but we're following our kids' lead. And so we've been using he for over a year now. Iris, is your kid, is Troyer like speaking yet, saying words or?
A lot of signing. We probably primarily use American Sign Language.
Nice.
Okay, maybe a good a half and half split, maybe I'll say. So Tori's the stay-at-home parent, so that's why I can't speak to what happens during the day, but then they sign when I'm with them at night, and I'm like, okay, Tori is signing with you all day because you're having like a full-blown conversation with me right now. So yes, we so a lot of signing, a couple spoken words here and there. But like, so I'm a Coda, my parents are deaf, and so for me it was really important that we sign with them. And it's interesting because, and this is something that gosh, there's people I want to connect you with to come on the podcast and talk about certain things. I'll be sending you some names because this isn't
Great.
necessarily something that me as a hearing person can really speak to.
Right.
But the way that in any language in general, most languages at least have words have gender to them. So like Spanish is a big example.
Right.
In ASL, when you're using like, so just a very like, you know, brief way to explain this is like, if you were to say girl, mom, grandma, all of those signs are done on your chin. If you're going to say boy, dad, brother, grandpa, that's all on your forehead. So there has been this new wave of the deaf and queer community coming up with how do we approach gender neutral signs. And so we've just been following the lead of the deaf queer community and picking up what they're using. And so it'll be interesting how that's going to translate to with Troyer. But there is a deaf couple raising their own little coda who could talk so much more about that with you all if you ever were interested in that. But yeah, so I too is so crazy to me that your kid was able to articulate that for himself. And I think that is such an incredible show of just how early these things really do click for kids. Like he's obviously connected with that word. And like you said, maybe he doesn't fully, you know, I mean, at 2, okay, at 2, are you understanding the patriarchy? I don't know if you are, but obviously, you know, enough to be like, okay, this is what I want you to call me. I don't know that I necessarily identify with everything about what being a boy in society is, but this is what I want you to call me for now. And I think that's really cool that you had that experience at such a young age. And I can't wait to see if that happens for us, like when that's going to happen and when that conversation will be had. And I brought up Bobby McCullough earlier, and their child has like switched names a couple of times, which I also think is a really cool aspect of this and how they've let them do that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to when that day comes and you know how we're going to approach it. Like you all kind of took a couple of days to see if it was going to stick, maybe try different things on. I feel like maybe as they get older, well, do you want to try being called this? Do you want to, you know, things like that. We'll play with it a little. I think that's one of the most exciting parts of parenting, like we are, is that you have so much freedom in how you want to approach everything and anything. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, I mean, for my kid particularly, like he's been very consistent with you know,
Mm-hmm.
but again, I'm not going to be surprised or upset if that shifts at some point. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's totally cool. But yeah, that's, it is interesting how, you know, I definitely think that kids pick up a good amount of it. I agree with you. I don't know if it's like, you know, I don't think they're getting all the structured gender stuff that, you know, we do as adults, obviously, but definitely picking things up. And I've been kind of wondering too, because we are not presenting these really binary roles at home, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, I mean, honestly, like you hear of some trans kids identifying as trans really early. A lot of times when I hear those stories, and I don't have any like specific example right now, but like a lot of times when I hear those stories, it sounds like those kids are brought up in a very binary house, you know, binary, like teaching house. And then they're like, you keep putting me in dresses, but I don't identify with that, you know, and they switch. And so I think it's going to be interesting. And to us, it's just always going to be an open conversation, but
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see, you know, if a kid is not put into one of those boxes right away, what's their different approach to their own gender, just being able to be more fluid, from being welcome to be more fluid from the jump, if that's how they feel. So that's interesting. And also, I'm just going to mention, I do not know a lot of ASL, but we learned ASL when our kid was a baby. My wife is like super into a lot of different languages, but like she knew a tiny bit of ASL and started learning quite a bit more, took a couple classes and stuff. And so we don't,
That's great.
I honestly am not proficient enough that I feel like I could really have a big conversation with somebody, but I do, it's interesting because we use those signs that we have learned all the time. I still I sometimes sign to our kid and he'll talk back to me, which is interesting because I'm like, oh, you can tell what I'm saying, you know?
Yeah.
But I find it like, that's been really nice. I actually like, yeah, that's been a really nice addition to like our parenting as well. And especially before our kid was speaking more, you know, now his language is more developed, but that was really important. And certainly if he's overstimulated, I will sign. If I, you know, if I know the sign, I will sign, because a lot of times that will really help him focus more, rather than, because a lot of times it's like sound overstimulation for my particular kid. But yeah. Well, let's see. I know we're kind of running. I think we've gone past our hour here, but I want to just hit on a couple more things, if that's cool. So we've already talked quite a bit about like child-led gender exploration, and just really focusing on allowing your kid to be whoever they are and supporting them when, you know, whether the identity is fixed or shifts over time. I am certainly not against any, like, if my kid ends up being really, I don't want to say like really cis or really trans, but I mean, I guess that's fine. Like if my kid ends up being really, really masculine or really feminine, like I'm not, our approach to it too is like, we're not trying to even push gender fluidity. I mean, early on, I want to like show that to our kid, to kind of give him those options, you know. But if it turns out that like, you know, he really wants to be a girly girl, like that's fine. And if it turns out that he really wants to be a masculine boy, like that's fine. And so it's just really like, it's also not like this idea of gender creative parenting is not also like totally gender neutral. And I think a lot of people get tripped up by the pronouns because they think it's like, you know, you're raising your child gender neutral. And it's like, well, you know, we're using gender neutral pronouns because we really want our kid to show us who they are. And then we're going to just support whatever that is. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Everything you said, I
On it.
agree. I'm with you.
Riley, what about you?
No, absolutely. And like, I think kind of why I feel like ultimately I can say that my parents were, or at least my mom right off the back was pretty supportive of the gender neutral parenting, was because like when I came out to her, like her immediate response is like, you know, the I love you no matter what, like sort of response. So like I'm not gonna lie, that shit made me like sob. Like I was not expecting that response. So like getting that response was like the best case scenario. And so, like, getting that response though also was, like I said, not the response I was expecting. So like that was really not like I could have expected any sort of response, but like I guess like it's just still even to this day a little mind blowing to me that that was the response that I got, even though like it's fully been 11 and a half years. uh, but like it's still just like the idea though that like for a former military conservative woman, like that was her response, like just I love you no matter what. Like, you know, I could not have expected that.
That's awesome. That's so great that you had that support, you know, and from your mom. Like that's really, really awesome. I'm not in that same boat. And I kind of, like I mentioned earlier, like my you know, there are certain aspects that were definitely a little bit leaning towards gender creative parenting, but I had a very different, maybe somewhere in between what you experienced, Riley, and what you experienced, Iris. But yeah, I mean, that's just so awesome. It always is so heartwarming for me to hear of parents who are, you know, supportive of kids just being who they are. And Yeah, it's just like, I think that's the best way to parent, obviously. Well, I really just got just one more kind of point, and then we can wrap up. And you had mentioned this earlier, Iris, but there is also a bit of a through line with gender creative parenting, that the kid's anatomy is not anyone's business, or not very many people's business. I mean, I do think that we're going to have to rethink that approach as our kid gets to be school age, just as far as, just being like, just being responsible adults and being like honest and with, with the school, or, with parents of friends and things like that. But I definitely, at this age, at this point, it's just interesting. And Kyle Myers touched on this a lot in their book of like why do people really need to know? It's just, it's just really not anyone's business, and really doesn't need to be part of what certainly any stranger, or, really almost anyone interacting with your kid needs to know. And to me, it's interesting because it's really just a point of privacy for my kid.
Yeah.
Because I, again, like really don't want him to be pushed in any direction. And so just not, and again, it's like a little different because we're using gender pronouns. So everybody's going to make their assumption based on that. But just to not reinforce, boy and son and all of that. Like, that's another reason that I'm choosing my own language carefully for myself, because of that, and just really wanting to not influence other people's approach to my kid, and just really try to have them approach my kid as my kid. So you guys have any other thoughts on that? I know, Iris, you had mentioned it earlier, but
yeah, we knew from the start that there were going to be people in our life who were not on the same page as we are with what we were doing. And so we made the decision that it was going to be very strict with, who was changing diapers, who babysat, who was in those situations. And it was just us and the doctor for the longest time, and that meant a lot of sacrifice on our end. So there were times when, there were probably several months straight where we didn't get time together alone as a couple at all, just because that was something we had chosen to do. And the first time we had a daytime babysitter was after they were a year old. So it's just, well, I take that back. There was one other time with people who were also gender creative parenting, so they are totally on that train. But really, the other situation was after they were a year old, and that was the decision we made. And I think I would, like, you don't want to say without Tori here, what we would do if we have another child and how we would approach that. I think that we would still be pretty firm in that approach, just to make sure people are all using the language that we're asking of them, but maybe with a little extra help in the newborn days. That was so hard. But yeah, that, and we know a lot of gender open families who did it differently. People who started using one pronoun or several pronouns, and then maybe changed their mind a little bit down the road. And we chose to consistently use the gender neutral pronouns, and it took probably the whole first year of their life for people to get the hang of calling them that. Like some of our family members, and I feel like I can finally be like, oh my gosh, they're getting it. It's happening, But it's also, wild to me that it had to take that time. And, you know, I wouldn't have changed the way that we have approached it. And I think that, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but, there's going to come a time when we're trying on different pronouns or they pick a different pronoun and we're going to follow their lead with that. So, but, for the first year, they're not talking. I mean, the first year we make all the decisions for them, and that was a big one we made. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I just have found it's interesting that like, one of the things like we've also talked about noticing different things from gender creative parenting. One thing that I've noticed is just like how much other parents gender their kids. Like it's, I mean, a lot of times it's just not like a lot of parents don't even tend to use non-gendered terms, they just like, it's always referring to, son or daughter or like that. And that's, and again, that's like, fine, that's cool. But it's just something I've noticed of like, that people are just very, very attached to just reinforcing that in so many ways.
Yeah. And I liked what you commented on earlier about privacy, which is a big thing for us as well. And like if we hadn't approached parenting like this, I still don't think we would have been like a change your kid's diaper in the middle of the floor in a crowd type of family. I think that it's important to us that we allow them this privacy at even such a young age. And then at the same time, sometimes it gives us an opportunity to speak with cousins or friends who are, 2, 3, 4 that age. And my nephew has started to be like, give baby Troy your privacy. Like they need their privacy and I need my privacy when I go to the bathroom. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Everyone deserves that privacy, And yeah, that is so important to us, and safety. And I think that will also evolve as, they get older and school and, preschool and maybe needing help to use the potty. I love that we've said potty this entire time. Riley's like, okay.
Like, parents of young kids.
It's okay. No, I mean, quite literally, my puppy is pretty much a child at this point, and I literally am like, all right, let's go potty. Let's go potty. Let's go.
Yep. So you get it. I think that may have to change a little bit as those situations do come about. But I think that is so key in all of the way that we have discussed that we approach parenting, is that piece of privacy as well, giving them at even such a young age that level of, hey, this is a bathroom situation. Like we're gonna do this privately just like everybody else does, and that's not a other folks have approached me and said things like, how do you think that's gonna affect their body positivity, or and I think that I wasn't even going to bring that up today until we started talking about this, because I'm like, that is a whole, like we could spend another half hour, I'm sure, talking on that. And I would love to another time catch up on that topic, because I would love to hear your thoughts. But people have asked me about that, like, how do you think that's going to contribute to their body positivity? And I'm like, right now I think that it's okay to love your body and also want privacy when you're going to the bathroom. And I think that it will change. It will be a different conversation as they're getting older, in because you also want to respect other people. Like, do we want to change right now in front of someone else who they might be uncomfortable, and it's not because there's something wrong with you, but we want to respect everybody's boundaries and everybody's privacy and all that. So I think that is something we could talk on, but yeah, I think that'll come into play as they get older.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's interesting that people have approached you with that. That's a trip. I've had that approach before, but you definitely are in communication with a lot more people than I am around on this subject. So that is really interesting. And it's great to, I mean, I think it's interesting when people, of course, I don't ever want anybody to be hostile. And even though I haven't talked to a lot of people, I have encountered some hostility, but I think it's always good to me when somebody kind of brings something like that up, because it helps me kind of check on that, myself, and just like, oh, well, that's, like, is that something that I actually care about? And like, how could I include that too? I mean, for us personally, it's like, if it's just us at home, like our kid can, be without clothes, that's fine.
Yep.
But it's, but we do, definitely draw that line with most other people.
Yeah.
So that's, but yeah, that's definitely a good point to bring up. Well, I know we could keep talking about this just for so long and we'll have to see, what future episodes might be in store to talk more about other experiences with this. Like, I definitely have other things I could share. I'm sure you have other things you could share, and other people too. And I'm kind of curious too, to know what some of our other co-hosts on the show as well. So we'll see if we can, have another round of topic on gender creative parenting, or, approaching gender with kids and things like that. But I think we should probably wrap up for tonight. But before I give my little wrap up speech here, Riley, do you have anything else you want to add?
Not tonight. No, I think I'm pretty good now.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you both, Riley and Iris, so much for joining us for this episode. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the conversation and willingness to be open and talk about this. And thank you all who are listening and watching for joining us for the episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can find this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And you can also go to our website directly at transcendinghumanity.com. And there you can access audio files of the show. You can access the YouTube video, and you can also access an audio transcript. And we also have links to Patreon if you want to support the show and become a patron. Currently, this show is self-funded, so we welcome patrons. Anyway, thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time on Transcending Humanity.